Manx Murders, adapted from his book by Keith Wilkinson. Read by Mark Clift. The Murder of Frances Alice Quayle.
In 1914, as Europe moved towards the Great War, the people of the Isle of Man faced a threat that was almost as alarming for the community. The suspicion that a brutal killer was on the loose. The fear grew as a result of the death of Frances Quayle. Mrs. Frances Alice Quayle was a 55-year-old widow and lived alone at 40 Bucks Road, Douglas. She kept a small grocery shop, also selling wines and spirits, that adjoined her house, and she was well respected in the area. She was about 6 feet tall and described as a well-built lady. Very fond of animals, she had a small garden close to her house where she kept rabbits. After closing her shop on the evening of Saturday the 25th of April 1914, she briefly called at a sweet shop opposite, which she left at 10:35 p.m. Asked if she was not afraid of going to her garden at such a late hour, she replied that she had been there at all hours and had never been molested and had no fear. There were no reported sightings of her on the Sunday, and her young grandson would later describe how he called at her house that day, but there was no answer. The following morning, Monday the 27th of April, neighbours became anxious when her shop was still closed for business. After a brief search of her house, a neighbour contacted her son-in-law, John Cowley, and the pair went to her garden off the narrow lane which joined Tynwald Street and Clark Street. The gate in the high wall surrounding the garden was locked. Mr. Cowley climbed over it and found the battered body of his mother-in-law next to the rabbit hutches. The body was discovered in a huddled-up sitting position with the face towards the ground and the top of the head beaten in. A lot of blood lay around the body. The police and a doctor were called, and the body was removed to the mortuary. An inquest opened on the Tuesday following the discovery of the body. After a few witnesses gave evidence, it was adjourned and the body was buried on Thursday the 30th of April at Braddon Church. The missing keys to the garden gate and her shop were found in a lane close to the garden, and it was felt that the killer had taken these with the intention of robbing Mrs. Quayle's shop. But nothing was found to be missing from either her shop or her house. The murder weapon was an eye bolt, found in a garden a few hundred yards from the murder scene. It was blood-stained and had a few strands of the victim's hair adhering to it. Assistance was requested from Scotland Yard, and 2 detectives came to the island. At the resumed inquest, several witnesses gave evidence. Dr. Caird described the severe head injuries and said the skull fractures, bruising and lacerations could not possibly have been self-inflicted, nor could they be the result of an ordinary fall. He felt the injuries were caused by repeated heavy blows with a blunt instrument, adding, "The injury to the head could perfectly well have been caused by the eye bolt." He explained that there was bruising to all the fingers of both hands and several were broken, and said there was a great deal of blood on and around the body. Several people saw Mrs. Quayle in the area of the lane next to her garden, but the only one who saw anything suspicious was Thomas Hall, a butcher who lived in Tynwald Street. He described how he met a man called Thomas Angus Moore and was talking to him when Mrs. Quayle passed them. Moore asked her for a match and she gave him one, then went on her way. According to Hall, Moore then said he would knock her bloody head off, as she had refused to serve him in her shop. Hall also claimed that Moore was carrying an eye bolt that evening. Moore was questioned by police, but emphatically denied any involvement in the murder. Mary Jane Caniper described how she was on her way to church at 7:30 a.m. with her children on the Sunday morning, 26th of April, when her little boy had found a bunch of keys. She informed a police officer who found that one of them fitted the lock in the door to the garden. The murdered lady's brother, Campbell Cubban, offered a reward of £50 for information leading to the conviction of the killer. He said, "Hanging is too good for the man who has done this deed. He ought to be cut into pieces and flung into the sea. He is not fit to be on God's acre among other men and women, and not fit to be buried with other people." Despite their efforts, the police were unable to solve the murder. In his summing up, the coroner dismissed the evidence given by Hall. He said he felt Moore had told the truth, adding, "I am very much inclined to suggest to you that Hall's story is fictitious." The inquest jury returned a verdict of wilful murder by a person or persons unknown. The murder was never solved.